will move to the second item in the manager's oral reports, which is an update on downtown parking.
So, Mayor and Council, I just want to introduce Leah Riley. She is our Transportation and Environmental Services Director. Yay. I introduced her last time, but she's actually going to be part of the presentation tonight. And then Katie North is our Division Chief with Mobility Services, and she's brought along her quality staff tonight. And this is really an update about with the loss of parking at Market Square and some of the things that we are looking at and have looked at. And this is the expert team that can speak to that management of that entire program.
Great, first time. Thank you. Again, Leah Riley, I'm the Director of Transportation and Environmental Services. Nice to be here tonight. So Mayor Gaskins, Vice Mayor Bagley, members of the council. Parking in Old Town, as you know, requires very careful balance. We need to balance the needs of businesses, residents, visitors, and our employees. And Old Town is one of the most vibrant destinations in the city, and that means that the demand for curb space is growing in Old Town. And it's incumbent upon us to manage that demand thoughtfully, and we need to maintain accessibility, but also think about supporting our economic vitality while doing that. So this summer, as you all have already talked about a little bit, there's going to be significant activity in Old Town, and the historic renovation of City Hall will be continuing. This will be in partnership or at the same time as lots of festivals, waterfront programming, and community events that are supporting our local businesses and strengthening our economy. And that means more residents and visitors are going to be coming to Old Town to shop. They're going to be coming there to dine. They're going to come to participate in these events. And that means the city has an opportunity to enhance how parking and curbside access can be managed to support those events, accessibilities, and support our visitor experience. And we need to think about these things both for the near term and for the future. So tonight, staff is going to provide you an update on the current conditions in Old Town, and they're going to walk you through several actions that we have already taken, and they're going to highlight some near-term improvements, including operational changes. Those are intended to improve turnover, access, and the customer experience, especially during our peak season this summer. And staff is also going to discuss some longer-term strategies that the city is exploring to prepare for the future of mobility. And these efforts are focused on creating a more flexible, efficient, and sustainable curb management system. We appreciate the council's continued partnership as we work through both the immediate summer, the restoration of City Hall, and the broader long-term opportunities to strengthen parking and curbside management in Old Town. And with that, I will turn it over to Max, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Director Riley. Max DeVilliers, Parking Curbside Management. So as she said, we know parking is a huge challenge in our dense neighborhoods here in Alexandria. We are preparing for the future of mobility by shifting our focus from long-term vehicular storage to access for all. As you all know, the typical historic row building in Old Town has no off-street parking and is 20 feet wide, which is the same length as a legal parking space. So on-street parking has never been and cannot be the only solution to improving access to Old Town. In 2024, the Traffic and Parking Board approved the criteria-heavy administrative procedure for installing pickup drop-off or PUDO signage, accompanied by an annual review process to ensure the zones are being used as intended. Several PUDO zones have been removed and added since the pandemic to adapt to the changing demands along the curb. These zones help to accommodate all kinds of quick curbside errands, mitigating double parking. Only 9 metered spaces have been replaced with the PUDO zones east of Washington Street since 2020. Despite the high visibility of our scooter corrals, for example, no legal parking spaces were removed to install these east of Washington Street. And the corrals are helpful to physically prevent drivers from obstructing crosswalks and legally require dockless mobility operators to deploy their devices in the parking lane rather than on the sidewalks. And finally, our curb space prioritization framework in the Alexandria Mobility Plan approved by council helps guide our work as we continuously fine tune our curbs to meet the demands of the adjacent land uses and the ever-changing business landscape. We understand the parking challenges we face. The core challenge is that we are managing a limited public resource, the curb. There is competing demand for short and long-term parking, loading, unloading, pickup and drop-off, bus stops, ADA compliant access, micromobility, outdoor dining, and much, much more. We're not just managing parking, we're managing access and safety for all. There is still enough parking available. What's really happening right now is that we are facing a very visible, yet temporary, reduction in supply as parking demand surges due to Alexandria's success. The available parking is simply not where people want it, which is typically on the street directly in front of their destination. It's important to note that there are still 12 publicly accessible off-street parking garages and lots east of Washington Street. However, here are some helpful solutions our team will be rolling out or has recently rolled out to address parking concerns. Recently, we identified several locations where on-street parking could be added, starting with 19 new spaces on Duke Street approved in April and more than 30 spaces for the Traffic and Parking Board to consider in June. Staff has also worked closely with APD in improving parking enforcement to compel turnover in valuable on-street spaces. APD hired a parking enforcement contractor to address various concerns from businesses and residents, and they are now working to expand that contract per council's recommendations to include nights and weekends. Transportation Environmental Services also helped to procure license plate readers for APD to speed up enforcement. The most effective way to influence parking behaviors is through pricing. For several years, our team has used pricing strategies to compel high turnover on commercial blocks and incentivize long-term parking off-street. Staff worked with Park Mobile to develop the residential pay-by-phone program in 2019 on several residential blocks of Old Town, which staff took a step further in 2022 by increasing the rate to $3 per hour on blocks with high demand. That same year, staff also got council's approval to lower the rates in city-owned parking facilities to encourage drivers to use those off-peak. Most recently, staff worked with council to increase the general on-street meter rate and the parking-related citation amount to further compel turnover and encourage parking long-term off-street. The city has wayfinding signage for various off-street parking facilities, and in late 2024, staff procured real-time parking availability signage for city-owned garages and also implemented Park Mobile in those garages to make it easier and quicker to park there. Staff continue to update the Where to Park in Old Town webpage and map and share with businesses and Visit Alexandria. The discount parking program for Old Town businesses has been in place for several years, but we are in the midst of revamping it. Employees of these businesses can park in the courthouse garage for a total of just $1 after 4 p.m. on weekdays and all day weekends and holidays. We are working to make this easier to administer through the use of a preloaded access card, and then we'll heavily advertise the program to further encourage employees to park off-street.
Max, before you go forward, for the Old Town discount business, the Old Town business parking program, is this only at the courthouse garage? And if so, how many spaces can be utilized?
Currently, yes, it's only at the courthouse garage. It was formerly administered in the Market Square garage. And after looking at the parking occupancy in earlier months of this year compared to the months prior of the year prior, we found that we could accommodate up to 90 spaces after 4 p.m. on weekdays.
Okay. And for most of our boutiques in Old Town that are just open from 10 to 5 on weekdays, what sort of, I guess, changes might we make to the parking program in order to accommodate their employees?
Well, the issue is that our city-owned facilities, which we only own 6 of in Old Town, are heavily utilized during the day. So we'd have to look at that further.
Have we explored for the garages that we do not own? Have we explored any type of similar partnership?
I will let Sheila.
Maybe that's a good, on to the next slide, Max. So these are some of the potential actions we've looked at, and we've had a lot of suggestions in addition to the items that were mentioned on the previous slide, one of which is exactly what you're speaking to, Mayor Gaskins. So we continue to explore other options and ideas that are put forward, including the ones on the slide and the one you mentioned just now. At this time, we've been focusing on the efforts that Max just talked about, due to staff time and resources and short-term improvements. And I'm going to also talk about some long-term improvements, but that being said, we can take direction as needed. Next. Okay.
And just so I'm clear, so for what I was raising, that's bullet 2 that we'd be looking at? And it would be for the 10 to 5 range, or it would still be for the same hours of after 5?
So these potential actions are actions we have not begun working on at these time. We've been focusing on the efforts on the previous slide. So we haven't looked at anything in specific.
Madam Mayor,
Councilman Garrett and then Councilman Chapman.
I just want to, I'm assuming maybe we're getting to another slide coming up at some point, or is this the last one?
There's a couple more slides.
Okay. So first of all, I just want to share that I would be opposed to subsidizing businesses parking. I have no issue with introducing a business to a private garage so that they can work out a deal themselves. But for the city to be subsidizing in a private garage that isn't city owned, I would be highly against that. So I just want to put that out there for the public and for everybody. But like I said, I have no issue with helping to connect two groups or businesses. We have definitely gotten some 311s and some emails from some folks concerned about it. I did a quick search and without any, partnership between businesses and garages, they could get a monthly rate for about $100. Sure, it's not right next to their business, but they'd be able to leave their car there for the whole day. It's not our job to do that research for them. We could point them in the right direction. So I think some folks that are employees, they need to be taking a better look at what their options are. And I'm not saying that you can't drive, because a lot of folks are coming from outside of the region to work here, but there are spaces available and there are garages available and there are rates that are available to them. So if we need to do a better job marketing some of that or just pointing them in that direction, then that's what we need to do. But again, not going to subsidize parking in private garages for businesses.
Councilman Chapman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So for my questions, staff said that we have kind of the automated signs on spots left, that fourth one, for our garages. Has there been any conversation with private garages about similar signage so that they have something as well, or anything like that? Have they kind of said no to that? Has there been any conversation around that?
Katie North, we haven't had any direct conversations with those garages. We'd be happy to share the plans that we used to create this sign. With new developments that are adding garages, we have been adding requirements that they add city standard wayfinding signs, but we haven't been actively reaching out to those garages at this point in time.
Is there, to dive more into that, is there any reason why not? I think we've seen with the limited usage that we've had of this, that it's something that works. And I think there are probably other jurisdictions that can attest to the fact that it does work. Obviously, there's some differences between what we own and what private industry does. But, any suggestions about, I would assume suggestions to private industry to say, hey, this might be a little bit more useful and probably make your money back if you did this, might be helpful.
We can certainly reach out to the garages and offer to share the plans that we had and help them with that process if they're interested.
This might not work for what we're specifically talking about in terms of non-employees, but I know years ago there was conversation about proposals to partner with National Park Service, maybe at Jones Point. Has that something that the door has been closed on, I'm assuming?
Sure. Councilman Chapman, yes, I have been in contact with Superintendent Modello. She's the superintendent for George Washington Memorial Parkway region, and have requested if we could park at Jones Point, and they are not willing to consider that at this time.
Yeah, I think in the past, they've always raised kind of security issues around that. So I assume that has not something that's been changed, but I just wanted to ask the question. I think those are my questions at this point. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just as we're going through, when I think about the opportunity for us as like the private garages, I think what I'm trying to get at is it seems to me like there is more than enough parking. And to Max's point, we're never going to create many more spaces on the street. And so whether that is marketing, whether that's facilitating a connection, I'm just trying to figure out how we get people, particularly employees who are there for multiple hours and can't turn over their cars during the day. How do we get them to other garages that even if they're not right next door, they're a few blocks away or somewhere to kind of help free up the limited amount of spots that we have. And I think we'll only be able to do so much with our infrastructure. And so this is where the private garages will be really important. Vice Mayor Bagley.
I was sort of biting my tongue on this, but you've given me sort of an opportunity. I think to Councilman Aguirre's point about us sort of subsidized parking, and to your point about we're not going to go around building a lot more parking. I think maybe the opportunity that I'm curious if staff is considering is like some sort of almost airport shuttle style, that moves around during the day. I know one of the things that has been expressed is if there are servers who are leaving restaurants with cash and they're not, they are physically able and willing to park 5 blocks away, except they don't want to make that journey with, a couple $100s in cash on them at 11 o'clock at night. Alternatively, if a family's coming down and they go to restaurant, but grandma can't make the 5 block walk, but they can drop off and then park 5 blocks away, and grandson can walk back, or can pick up the shuttle. I'm curious, and we don't have to, doesn't be included tonight, but maybe that's a gap bridging. We can't pay for the parking and we can't necessarily build it, but is there an opportunity for us to use, a shuttle? And I know we already have the circulator, and I know we have, when you sit on King Street, the volume of buses is phenomenal, with the trolleys and the buses. But so I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know. I know this is very focused on curb management, but is there a way to pair curb management with some sort of, employee or resident driven shuttle, or, something that literally just loops around between known lots? Just a thought, because I live in North Old Town, where I see lots of parking availability, and trying to figure out how do we induce people. Or I was also thinking on the west end, the other question I had that I was kind of biding my time on is, I appreciate this feels very focused on east of Washington, at least the slides so far had been, but I think that there are a few garages by the metro, and I don't know honestly what their capacity is, but I imagine there is some, but I don't know. Yeah. And so is that an environment where if we can get tourists or even employees who are willing to make that walk or hop on a shuttle, how do we induce people into those garages? And maybe I just haven't gotten to that slide yet, but just all of the above kind of approach. I should have, I was trying to land with a question, but it was really just it was more just like a reaction to, where if you're looking for feedback, you know what I mean? And kind of where my head is at. I agree with Councilman Aguirre's concern about sort of subsidizing the parking itself, but partnering it, you know what I mean? Giving it companions feels like a better fit for our role.
Yeah. And I think your point about west of Washington, but also Old Town North and other areas, that it's what's the whole radius that we want to capture. I saw Councilman Chapman and then Councilman Aguirre.
Staff could go back to that. If staff could go back to the slide with the parking lots or garages. I think one of the tools, maybe to the Vice Mayor's point, that we probably need to have a conversation with Visit Alexandria and others, and I think Dash, is about the use of the trolley. There's nothing that says we can't change the route of the trolley. Yes, we wanted to go up and down King Street, but it doesn't mean that it can't go a couple more blocks this way. I think we've already seen that with the construction and the work that we've done there. And so maybe there's an opportunity, particularly as we go into these major events, where we use the trolley for that reason, that purpose as well. And or some of I think it's probably a lot harder with the dash bus routes, but I don't think it's maybe not as hard with the trolley, given, we control what that route is and probably don't have to do some of the juggling we would have to do with dash buses. But on the dash bus piece, maybe there's an opportunity to kind of either better educate or better communicate some of these garages as potential stops where people can get on or off at. And maybe that could be helpful to visitors or even regular residents being able to know if they park at this garage, they can get on this bus to go to downtown and come back and get off there. Just a thought.
Councilman Aguirre.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And no, Councilman Chapman kind of took some of the words right out of my mouth. I think one of the things that we need to try and advertise and promote is what dash lines do go next to some of these garages, because the garage that I was actually thinking about that's at about $100 a month for a monthly fee is further up North Fairfax, which the 34 and the 31 go by. So it would be easy to get onto a safe type of shuttle late at night that's still running, because I believe the 30 is still running that late at least, that you could then, you're not walking 5 blocks, you're maybe walking 1 block. Additionally, with some of the parking directly across the street from the Metro, I think it's the Embassy Suites and the parking garage that they have there. I mean, there's some businesses surrounding there that even offer, 2-hour validation if you go get lunch or something there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of advertising and just partnering with some of the garages or partnering with AEDP or Visit Alexandria or partnering with these businesses to facilitate some of this conversation and some of this knowledge. And I do like Councilman Chapman's idea around the trolley, because the trolley already is diverting. So if it were to turn on, say, Pitt, and then I don't know if it can make that turn on Queen Street, but if it were to go all the way to Queen Street and then come back up Fairfax, then it's hitting number 16, which I'm assuming is a garage. I'm hoping, just because it's numbered. But that covers, 16, 5, 14, 2. As opposed to having a longer walk, you're now just a block away if you're getting off at a stop at, say, Queen and Fairfax, somewhere in that area. And of course, the buses are already coming down Fairfax for, their regular routes anyway. So it seems like a kind of a natural detour, if you will, that we could probably explore with the trolley. Not so much the other dash lines, because they've, have fixed service routes, but the trolley, I think, is something that we could definitely work with. Yeah, no question there, just comments.
Thank you, Councilman Aguirre. Yes.
So did want to talk about how one of our longer term projects, and hopefully it can get some of this, because one of the pieces it does capture is occupancy, even in some of the private garages. So maybe that can be an eventual helpful piece to some of the comments you guys have made. So as part of the current parking and curbside management work plan, we have been working on using technology to prepare for the future of mobility. Utilizing grant funds, we have started a project with the Open Mobility Foundation to complete a citywide digital curb inventory using CDS. CDS, or the Curb Data Specification, is a digital tool that helps cities pilot and scale dynamic curb zones. CDS provides a mechanism for expressing static and dynamic regulations, measuring activity at the curb, and developing policies that create more accessible, useful curbs. Through our CDS tool, we will also have access to on-street occupancy numbers that help us make decisions, tweak pricing, and target enforcement efforts. CDS is also part of an autonomous vehicle readiness strategy that will allow the city to communicate with connected vehicles. In the near term, loading zones represent an opportunity to develop tools that can deliver meaningful change. These high-demand curb spaces provide a targeted area to advance shared goals like safety, sustainability, and accessibility. Using CDS, we are working towards an initial project focusing on loading and pickup and drop-off zones, and we are laying the groundwork to extend CDS to more curb use cases in the future. So as we kind of just summarizing some of what we've been talking about, parking in Old Town has long been a challenge. In the summer, those pressures will continue to be noticeable due to the temporary loss of parking associated with the City Hall renovation project, along with the increased activity and attendance at seasonal events. We have been actively working on both managing our parking supply and demand and access based on our curb space prioritization framework through short and long-term projects, including supply adjustments, partnering with parking enforcement, adjusting parking pricing, and implementing technology solutions. We recognize the importance of balancing the many competing demands for limited curb space and continue working to support residents, businesses, and visitors through a range of parking management program policies and operational strategies. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I do think there are a few more comments and questions. I'm going to start with Councilman Chapman.
So going back to the CDS, make sure I'm saying it right. What is, and I know this is future, quote unquote, future, any potential timeline on kind of when something like this might be implemented? I know staff said they're going kind of after a grant to kind of get this kicked off. But what is this?
We actually have grant funds and we're actually implementing it. So it's currently we're in the initial phases of mapping all of our curbs using this tool. So this is actually a screenshot from it. And so we're actually in the midst of working on it. So this is coming soon.
If I could add, council member, the inventory we're currently working on with grant funding, but in order to actually use it as an enforcement tool, we're going to have to work through legislative issues in terms of our ability to issue fines or tickets from the system.
Yeah, very interesting. I know I've seen it at a couple of NLC conferences about some other localities kind of moving forward with this type of technology. Very interested in kind of where, particularly in Old Town, with loading zones and how interesting those have become, probably might be the word. I don't know. I've seen a couple of recent posts about some challenges down there. I know with changes that the city has made, including the pedestrian blocks, and obviously now with City Hall, I know folks are still kind of going through challenges down there. But I'm very interested to see how this can be helpful. And, to me, I think one of the other remaining questions is how engaged has the business community kind of been with what we're doing in terms of parking outside of kind of employee parking? Obviously, they have constituents, customers, et cetera, that they want to make sure still have access, like staff is talking about. Have we been able to open opportunities to hear from them and kind of take input?
I think that is one of the challenges we are facing because we don't have a single point of contact. We have hundreds of different businesses up and down King Street. So while we do hear from businesses and try to respond to them through 311s or through direct emails or through working with some of the key stakeholders that we have worked with in the past, we don't have a centralized location where we can sort of share ideas about maybe the parking garage signage as an option or the discount parking program. So I think we're trying to work through as many advocates as we have so that we can spread the word as best as we can.
Can I ask a follow-up on maybe the manager's getting at this, but I was going to say, I know a few months ago we heard a presentation from the Office of Climate Action that they're going door to door with businesses to put out their green business program. We also heard a similar update from AEDP saying that they're also doing some door to door. I just wonder if we already have staff going out business to business, if there's a way to kind of leverage that outreach.
Yeah, you hit part of what I was going to say. The other part is we've started a business e-news that really is a conduit to utilize that platform. Along with, as you said, there's I think 3 or 4 initiatives ongoing right now that are reaching into those business business community at different levels. I think the combining of that effort could make it much easier for us to get coherent feedback, comprehensive feedback on multiple pieces. And I think that's something that we can work on. I did want to highlight, just to kind of summarize a couple of the things that I think we hear, facilitation of what we already have on the private side with basically our small businesses along that corridor. That is something, meshing that together, I think represents a great opportunity. And I think that's something I think that the staff has already been doing some of that, but we can really ramp that up in a more significant way, particularly as it relates to the garages. And that also links to what I think many of you talked about was, okay, once that happens, the later in the evening and how to make sure that there's public transit that serves that. Those are the two I think specific takeaways that we had, as well as certainly making the private garage entities aware of some of the technology that we've used that have been very effective, such as the digital signs or the Park Mobile that you guys have been able to put in garages, as well as perhaps availability of digital information about what's going on and how to find opportunities for parking. Because I think at the end of the day, I think there is significant parking. As everyone's highlighted, it's really about the management of that. So does that capture three of the key areas of the council? Because I think from here, what we would want to do is do some of that research, come back with you with some more detailed recommendations. I will say some of the recommendations that the staff has, they're ready to bring that forward to, I think some of this has to go to the Traffic and Parking Board, particularly as it relates to the 30 or so spaces, I think, that are really loading areas and other areas on street that the staff has looked at the usage, looked at the observation of how they function, and tightened those up a little bit to pick up some more spaces.
I guess the only two that I would add, there was conversation around looking at the trolley route and Dash, and particularly for the trolley, are there opportunities for alternative routes? And then I think there was also a conversation about expanding the radius that we're looking at all the way up to near the King Street Metro. Yes, and Old Town North. And I guess as part of that, I would just be curious. We can't do everything at once, but given our first big test is going to be Sale 250, and I think we're expecting thousands of people to come, is at a minimum, could we get out within the next week the map or partner with Visit Alexandria on pushing people so that we can test and see if some of these things work? Another thing that I'm thinking about too with the inventory is even just like, where are the Uber and Lyft drop off points? Where are they at? How do we get that stuff out as soon as possible so that whenever we're putting out communications about that big event, we are already testing this and we can see, like, did it lead to the result we were seeking? I have Councilman Chapman still, then Councilman Green, and then Vice Mayor Bagley.
Just to add on to what the mayor's talking about, I think another opportunity to kind of do tests, because I do like using some of these events to do that. One that we have every year is going to be the city's birthday party. We know there's a ton of people that go to that specific place or places along the waterfront. And so testing trolley routes as we put out kind of dedicated communication for that event could be something that could be useful. A couple of years ago, several years ago, I think a number of us on council talked about, I think a number of us, maybe just me, talked about trying to have what was quote unquote a parking czar. Because I think one of the things that we have realized is not just only in Old Town or North Old Town or Southeast Quadrant, these relationships with private industry are kind of essential to the culture and what we build there. We're starting to see that more and more on the West End as well. And so being able to have, I don't know if it's a czar, but just some capacity to create those relationships, I think would go pretty far in making sure we bring private industry along with us as we are making technological advances in curb management, but also signage for the city was a long conversation. I know a number of you probably gotten a history lesson on wayfinding signage in Old Town. But being able to have some capacity to do that or even build that out in future budget years if we need additional staff for that, I think would go a long way as we start to see more people go into Delray and need options for parking. West End as well as Old Town, and particularly around some of the events we do. where private industry has not always adjusted. So thank you.
Councilwoman Green.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would it be possible that I could get and I don't need it now, but have it sent to me, the other city-owned garages? And out of those 6 garages, why was the courthouse one picked for the 4 p.m. discounted parking? I don't know the other location, so that might be the most centrally located location, but just wondered why that one was selected.
We look at our occupancy rates. We have that, and courthouse is high occupancy during the day, but low evenings and weekends. So we
Wouldn't
had
I'm sorry, wouldn't that pretty much be the same with all the garages though?
our garage on North Union Street has high occupancy on the weekends,
And not during the day?
and not as high. It's still used, but not as high.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor Bagley.
This is probably falls outside of y'all's expertise, but I think I wanted to highlight maybe for the city manager and maybe I don't know where this lands actually, but how can we find out the extent to which people arriving by car are the people we are seeing in our shops and in our restaurants? And because I think there is understandably some natural bias towards assuming the people in the restaurants parked in front of the restaurant or the people, because the cars are there. It's just, but I don't know. And so I don't know if that's a tool that, people in your field, have available, and I don't know exactly, if that's going back to the businesses themselves, but I think it could be really useful to helping us determine what to invest in if we understood better where are the customers, how are the customers arriving, generally speaking? Because even if they are mostly arriving by car, but mostly parking in garages, and not so much the streets, well, maybe that tells us something about, our willingness to build a $20 million garage, at some point. But I would really like to know that, because if what we learned is plenty of them are arriving by Metro, plenty of them are arriving by Uber, plenty of them are, Capital Bike Share, scooters. I think that just, it lends support to creating more space for those things. But maybe they aren't. And I don't know what the answer is, but I would love it if we could research some tools that could help us understand how people are arriving into this grid. I feel like Ms. Riley might have an answer, or
I mean, yeah, I don't know if we use these tools or not, but in my prior role, I collected all this data for downtown. It's whether you can use Placer data. I don't know if we have a subscription for Placer. It's very difficult through point of sale. The credit card companies will not give you that granular level of sale data because of privacy concerns, but you can get a larger area to try to understand spending habits and length of stay and how we can get gate entries and departures from our metro stops, alighting on our trolleys and our buses. And then when you you stitch these pieces of data together, you can get at what you're trying to decide. But I just don't know if we have the subscriptions in the city.
All right, I have Councilwoman Marks and then Councilwoman Marks.
Along the lines of Vice Mayor Bagley, I would be interested too to understand how long people are staying. So people, with hair appointments, we have lots of, salons, people who are out to dinner, brunch for long periods of time that are over 2 hours. I'd be interested to understand if they're parking in garages, if they're coming by Uber, or if they're parking in 2-hour spaces and we're ticketing them or not.
Seeing no additional comments, I want to thank you all for the presentation. It sounds like we'll be seeing you guys again. But I guess, Mr. Manager, we can follow up to talk about kind of the best, if this is a memo or what. And then I do think there were a couple ideas for some things we might be able to pilot and test quickly, or some data that we might be able to get back more strategically. So maybe in a future oral report before our summer recess, we can get a summary on that. But thank you all for the presentation and the options for us to consider.